My name is Mark. I'm 46 now, but this happened about 8 years ago, back when I still thought I had the world figured out, back when the woods were my sanctuary, not my nightmare. I was a land surveyor, not for a big company, just for myself. I had my own small business, just me and my equipment. It was good work, honest work. It paid the bills and it kept me outside, which was all I ever really wanted. My wife, Sarah, she used to say, I was more bear than man sometimes, happier out amongst the trees than I ever was at a neighborhood barbecue. She wasn't wrong. I grew up in northern Michigan. The woods were my backyard. My father taught me how to hunt, how to track, how to read the signs the forest leaves for you if you're patient enough to look. I knew the difference between a deer track and a coyote track from 50 yards away. I could tell you what kind of bird was singing without even seeing it. I knew the smell of pine after a rain, the scent of damp earth in the spring, the sharp, clean smell of a winter morning. Those woods were a part of me. I felt safe there, safer than I did in any city. The job I was on when it all happened was a boundary survey for a large plot of land that was being sold off by a logging company. It was deep in the sticks, miles and miles of dirt roads and two tracks that weren't on any normal map. You had to know where you were going, the kind of place where you don't get cell service, the kind of place where if your truck breaks down, you're walking a long, long way. But that never bothered me. I was prepared. I always had extra water, food, a first aid kit, tools, all of it. My truck was an old Ford, beat up but reliable. It was my office, my transport, my lifeline. This particular plot was over 100 acres of dense forest, mostly hardwoods with some thick pine stands mixed in. It was late October. The leaves were mostly down, carpeting the forest floor in a sea of brown and gold. There was a chill in the air that promised winter wasn't far off. It's my favorite time of year to be out there. The bugs are gone, the air is crisp, and you can see for a good distance through the trees. The work was slow and methodical, finding old survey markers, iron pins buried in the ground for half a century, hacking through brush to clear sight lines, setting up my tripod and total station, taking my measurements, making my notes. It was quiet, peaceful work. For the first week, everything was normal, absolutely 100% normal. I'd drive out before dawn, park the truck on the edge of the property where the two-track ended, and walk in with my gear. I'd work all day, the only sounds being the wind in the trees, the crunch of my boots on the leaves, and the occasional scolding of a squirrel. I'd see deer, sometimes a fox. Once I saw a black bear and her cubs from a safe distance. She saw me, I saw her, and we both went our separate ways. That's how it works in the woods. There's a mutual respect. You leave things alone, they leave you alone. I never felt threatened. Not once. The change was subtle at first. So subtle I barely noticed it. It started with the silence. Usually the forest is full of noise if you just stop and listen. Birds, insects, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. It's a constant, low-level symphony. But one afternoon I stopped for a break, leaned against a big oak, and realized there was nothing. No birdsong, no squirrels chattering, no rustling, just dead, heavy silence. It was the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, makes the hairs on your arms stand up. I remember thinking it was odd. Maybe a hawk was circling overhead, and all the smaller critters were laying low. It was a logical explanation. So I shrugged it off, finished my water, and got back to work. But the silence lingered for almost an hour. It was unnerving. I found myself looking over my shoulder more than usual. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the birds started singing again. The forest came back to life. The feeling of unease faded, and I chalked it up to just one of those weird things. A few days later, the smell started. It wasn't constant. It would just hit me out of nowhere, a wave of something foul on the breeze. It's hard to describe. It was like a wet dog mixed with something rotting, like roadkill that's been sitting in the sun for a week, but with a sharp, musky undertone. It was awful. The first time I smelled it, I figured a deer had died nearby. It happens. I made a mental note to try and steer clear of the area, but the smell was elusive. I'd catch a whiff of it, and then it would be gone. Then it would come back from a different direction. It never lasted long enough for me to pinpoint the source, and it was strong. Much stronger than any dead animal I'd ever smelled before. It was a gut-wrenching, overpowering stench that made my eyes water. Again, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a poacher had dumped a gut pile, or maybe it was just a swampy patch of ground releasing gas. I had an explanation for everything, because the alternative, that something was out there making that smell, was not something I was ready to consider. Then I started finding tracks. Not all the time, just here and there. I'd be walking a line, and I'd see a print in a patch of soft dirt or mud that would make me stop. They were huge, bigger than any wolf track I'd ever seen, bigger than any bear track. They were canine for sure. You could see the claw marks, but the shape was wrong, too long, too narrow, and the stride. The distance between the prints was enormous. Whatever made them was covering a lot of ground with each step. I took a picture of one with my phone once. I put my hand down next to it for scale. The print was half again as long as my hand. I sent the picture to a buddy of mine who was a biologist for the Department of Natural Resources. His text back was simple. "Big wolf or a dog? Where'd you see that?" I told him where I was working. He said it was probably just a lone wolf passing through, a big male. He didn't seem concerned, so I tried not to be either. But a wolf didn't explain the feeling I was starting to get. The feeling of being watched. It's a primal thing. You can't see anything. You can't hear anything. But you just know. Some part of your brain, the old part, the part that our ancestors used to survive, is screaming at you that there are eyes on you. It started happening in the late afternoons as the sun began to dip below the trees and the shadows grew long. I'd be packing up my gear, and I'd get that prickly sensation on the back of my neck. I would stand perfectly still and scan the trees. I'd sweep my gaze slowly across the landscape, looking for anything out of place, a flicker of movement, the shape of something that didn't belong. But I never saw anything, not a thing. Still, the feeling was so strong, so persistent, that I started packing up earlier each day. I wanted to be back in my truck, with the doors locked before it got too dark. That was new for me. I'd never been afraid of the woods. I'd never been afraid of the dark. But something out there was making me afraid. Sarah noticed the change in me. I was quieter at dinner, more tired. She asked if the job was getting to me. I told her it was just a lot of walking, a lot of tough terrain. I didn't tell her about the silence or the smell or the feeling of being watched. How could I? It sounded like nothing. It sounded like I was just spooking myself. I didn't want her to worry. I didn't want to admit to myself that I was worried. The final day of the survey was a Friday. I had just a few more hours of work to finish up the last section of the property line. I was eager to be done with the job. I was tired of the long drives, and I was tired of that feeling of constant, low-grade anxiety. I told myself that once this job was over, I'd take a week off, spend some time with Sarah and the kids, forget all about this creepy stretch of woods. The day started out normally. The weather was overcast and gray, the air heavy and damp. I worked my way along the last line through a thick stand of cedar. It was dark in there, even in the middle of the day. The dense branches of the cedars blocked out most of the light. The ground was a soft carpet of fallen needles which muffled my footsteps. It was quiet, but this time it was a natural quiet, the quiet of a thick cedar swamp. I finished my last measurement around 3 in the afternoon. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was done. I started packing up my equipment, breaking down the tripod, carefully placing everything back in its case. That's when I heard it. A sound I had never heard before. It was a snap, a loud crack, like a heavy branch breaking under immense weight. It came from deeper in the swamp, maybe 50 or 60 yards away. I froze. Every muscle in my body went tight. My first thought was a bear or a moose. It had to be something big to make a sound like that. I stood there for a full minute, listening. Silence. I slowly reached for the can of bear spray on my belt. I didn't unholster it, but I rested my hand on it, just in case. Then I heard another sound. This one was different. It was a heavy, rhythmic thudding. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, deliberate, and it was getting closer. It sounded like footsteps, but they were too heavy for a deer, too spaced out for a bear. A bear shuffles, it ambles. This was a steady bipedal gait. My mind raced. Was it another person? Maybe a hunter? But what would they be doing out here? The season wasn't open yet, and why would they be walking so heavily, snapping branches? Every hunter I know prides themselves on moving silently through the woods. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and weak in the dense woods. "Is someone there?" The thudding stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I was trying to stay calm, trying to think rationally. There is a logical explanation for this, I told myself. There is always a logical explanation. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, straining my ears, peering into the deep shadows between the cedar trees. Nothing. Maybe it was just a deer, and I was letting my imagination get the best of me. The woods can play tricks on you when you're alone. I slowly let out the breath I had been holding. I decided to just finish packing and get out of there. I bent down to pick up my heavy case of equipment. As I straightened up, I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I snapped my head in that direction, and that's when I saw it. It was about 40 yards away, standing partially behind a large cedar tree. At first, my brain didn't know how to process what I was looking at. It was dark, not black, but a dark, matted gray-brown color. And it was tall, taller than any man I've ever seen. Its head and shoulders were visible above a thick branch that had to be at least 7 feet off the ground. It was just standing there, motionless, watching me. I thought maybe it was a person in a ghillie suit, a prankster trying to scare me. But the proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were too broad, too massive. They were impossibly wide. And the head was not human. It was long. It had a snout, a long canine muzzle, and on top of its head, I could see them clearly, were two pointed ears standing erect, alert. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't have long snouts and pointed ears on top of their heads. This wasn't a man in a suit. The anatomy was just wrong. We stood there, locked in this silent standoff. I didn't move. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by a mixture of sheer terror and complete disbelief. My mind was screaming at me that this was impossible. Things like this don't exist. They are stories, campfire tales to scare kids. But my eyes were telling me a different story. My eyes were telling me that it was real, and it was standing right there. It took a step out from behind the tree. And that's when the last of my denial shattered. It moved with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. It was standing on two legs, long, powerful legs that were bent at the knee in a way that was distinctly animalistic. The legs were like a dog's, but adapted for walking upright. It had long arms, much longer than a human's, that ended in what looked like massive hands, with dark claws. The creature was covered in that thick, matted fur. It was lean, but powerfully built. You could see the bulge of muscle under the fur. It was a predator, an apex predator, and I was standing in its territory. It turned its head slightly, and I saw its eyes. They seemed to catch the dim light. They glowed, not like a cat's eyes, not a reflection. It was a faint, internal luminescence, a soft, amber glow. And in those eyes, I saw something that terrified me more than the claws or the teeth that I knew were hidden behind that long snout. I saw intelligence. It wasn't just a dumb animal. It was looking at me, studying me, assessing me. There was a cold, calculating curiosity in its gaze. Time seemed to slow down. Every detail was burned into my memory. The way the muscles in its neck bunched as it tilted its head. The way its ears swiveled independently, listening to the forest around us. The damp, musty smell of it, that same foul odor I had been catching for weeks, now filled the air, thick and suffocating. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was in mortal danger. This wasn't a chance encounter. It had been watching me for days, maybe weeks. The silence, the smell, the tracks. It was all this thing. It had been stalking me, and now, for whatever reason, it had decided to show itself. My hand was still on my bear spray. I slowly, carefully unclipped it from my belt. I didn't want to make any sudden movements. I raised it slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the creature. It watched the movement. Its head lowered slightly. A low sound rumbled from its chest. It wasn't a growl, not yet. It was deeper than that, a guttural vibration that I could feel in my own chest, even from 40 yards away. It was a warning. Don't do it. I had a choice to make. Stay and fight, or run. The thought of fighting this thing was laughable. The bear spray felt like a child's toy. My only hope was to get back to my truck. My truck was my armor. My truck was my salvation. It was a good quarter-mile away, back through the woods and across a small clearing. A quarter-mile felt like 100 miles right then. I started backing away, slowly, one step at a time. I didn't take my eyes off it. I didn't dare. The creature watched me. It didn't move. It just stood there, a towering, monstrous statue in the gloomy woods. Step by step, I increased the distance between us. 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My breath was shallow and ragged. Come on, Mark, I told myself. Just keep moving. Don't panic. Don't run. Running is what prey does. I had backed up about 50 feet when I made a mistake. My boot caught on a root, hidden under the leaves. I stumbled, catching myself before I fell. But the sudden movement was all it took. The creature reacted instantly. It dropped to all fours. The movement was so fast, so seamless, it was like watching a blur. One moment it was a 7-foot-tall bipedal monster. The next it was a massive, wolf-like beast, low to the ground, ready to charge. And then it let out a sound that I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. It was a snarl that turned into a full-throated roar. It was a sound of pure, unrestrained aggression, a sound that ripped through the quiet forest and seemed to shake the very air. It was a sound that said, "You are mine." That was it. My survival instinct took over. All thoughts of not panicking, of not running, vanished. I turned and I ran. I abandoned my expensive equipment right where it lay. I didn't care. My life was worth more than any piece of gear. I sprinted through the trees, my lungs burning, my legs pumping like pistons. I could hear it behind me. I could hear the crash of its body through the underbrush. I could hear the thunder of its paws on the forest floor. It was unbelievably fast. I risked a glance over my shoulder. It was a nightmare in motion. It was running on all fours, covering the ground with terrifying speed. It was closing the distance. Fast! Panic gave me a new burst of adrenaline. I ran harder than I have ever run in my life. Branches whipped at my face, clawing at my clothes. I didn't feel it. All I could think about was the sound of my own ragged breathing and the horrifying pursuit behind me. The woods seemed to go on forever. I burst out of the tree line and into the small clearing where the two-track ended. My truck was there, maybe 100 yards away. It looked like a fortress. It looked like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys as I ran. My fingers were clumsy, shaking. I finally got them in my hand, clutching the fob so tightly my knuckles were white. I could hear it behind me, exiting the woods, its heavy footfalls now on the open ground. It was so close. I could hear it breathing, a guttural, rasping sound. I didn't dare look back again. I just focused on the truck. 50 yards, 40 yards. I aimed the key fob and mashed the unlock button. I heard the reassuring click of the locks disengaging. 20 yards. 10. I reached the driver's side door, yanked it open, and threw myself inside. I slammed the door shut just as a heavy body impacted against it. The whole truck rocked on its suspension. A deep, furious snarl erupted from just outside my window. I hit the lock button, my hand shaking so violently I could barely do it. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life. I slammed the truck into reverse, not even looking, and stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the dirt, kicking up gravel and leaves. Then they caught, and the truck shot backward. I saw it in my side mirror. It had jumped back from the truck and was now standing on two legs again. It was huge. It loomed over the vehicle, a dark, terrible silhouette against the gray sky. Its amber eyes were burning with rage. It let out another roar, a sound of frustration and fury, and it slammed both of its massive clawed hands down on the hood of my truck. The metal crumpled with a sickening crunch. I cranked the wheel, threw the truck into drive, and floored it. I didn't care where I was going. I just had to get away. I tore down that two-track, the truck bouncing and sliding, branches scraping along the sides. I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. For a few terrifying seconds, it ran after the truck. It kept pace with me, running on two legs, its long arms pumping, its speed unnatural, impossible. I pushed the truck faster, hitting 30, then 40 miles per hour on a road that was barely safe at 15. Finally, I saw it fall back. It stopped in the middle of the road, watching me go. Even as it shrank in the distance, it seemed to fill my entire mirror. I didn't slow down. I drove like a madman until I hit the paved county road. I didn't slow down then either. I didn't stop until I was in my own driveway, with the garage door closed behind me. I just sat there in the truck for a long time, in the dark, the engine ticking as it cooled. I was shaking uncontrollably. My whole body trembled with the aftershock of adrenaline and terror. I looked at the hood of my truck. There were two huge dents in it, right where it had slammed its hands down. The metal was creased and torn. There were long, deep scratches in the paint. Proof it was real. It had really happened. When I finally went inside, Sarah took one look at me and knew something was terribly wrong. I was pale, covered in scratches. My clothes were torn. She asked me what happened. I opened my mouth to tell her, but the words wouldn't come out. How do you tell the person you love that you were just chased through the woods by a monster from a fairy tale? How do you explain that you came face to face with something that shouldn't exist? I just broke down. I sat at the kitchen table and I cried. I hadn't cried like that since I was a little boy. Eventually, I managed to tell her some version of the story. I told her I was attacked by an animal, a big one. I told her it was a wolf or a bear, I wasn't sure. I told her it chased me to the truck and damaged the hood. She believed me. She saw the terror in my eyes. She saw the dents in the truck. She wanted to call the police, the DNR. I told her no. What would I tell them? The truth? They would think I was crazy. They would say it was a bear. And I knew. I knew with every fiber of my being that it was not a bear. The aftermath was almost as bad as the event itself. I couldn't sleep for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing amber eyes. I heard that roar. I felt the impact on the truck door. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I became a different person. The man who loved the woods, who felt at home there, was gone. In his place was a man who was afraid of the dark, a man who jumped at every strange noise. I started locking all the doors and windows at night, something I'd never bothered with before. We lived in the country. We never locked our doors. Now our house was a fortress. I installed motion sensor floodlights all around the property. I bought a new, much larger caliber rifle. I kept it loaded and close by at all times. Sarah was worried. She tried to get me to talk to someone, a doctor, a therapist. I refused. How could I explain my paranoia to a stranger in an office? They wouldn't understand. They would give me pills and a diagnosis. Post-traumatic stress. But My stress wasn't post, it was present, because I knew that thing was still out there. The job was a total loss. My equipment was still out there in that cedar swamp, thousands of dollars worth of gear. I never went back for it. The thought of setting foot on that property again made me physically ill. I called the logging company and told them I couldn't finish the job. I made up an excuse about a family emergency. I sold my business a few months later. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be alone in the woods. The sanctuary was gone forever. I got a job in town, working in an office. I hate it. I hate being indoors all day, under fluorescent lights, but it's safe. The walls are solid, and there are no dark woods just outside the window. The dents are still in the hood of that old truck. I never got them fixed. I sold the truck to a kid down the road for cheap a few years ago, but for a long time they were a daily reminder. Sometimes, when I was feeling brave, or maybe just foolish, I would run my fingers over the deep scratches in the metal. Proof. It kept me sane in a weird way. It reminded me that I wasn't crazy, that what I saw was real. I did a lot of research after it happened. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I would sit at the computer and type in search terms I was ashamed of. Michigan dog monster, upright walking wolf, Dogman. I found out I wasn't the only one. There were other stories, hundreds of them, people from all over the state, all over the country, describing the same thing, the same height, the same canine head, the same glowing eyes, the same terrifying intelligence. Reading those stories helped. It made me feel less alone. But it also scared me even more, because if all these stories were true, it meant these things were everywhere, hiding in the wild places, watching us. I've never told this full story to anyone before. Not even Sarah knows all the details. She knows I was attacked by an animal that scared me half to death. She doesn't know that the animal stood on two legs and had the eyes of a devil. I don't think she could handle it. I don't think our marriage could handle it. She would think I'd lost my mind. So I carry it alone. This weight, this knowledge, it's been 8 years. The sharp edges of the terror have dulled a bit. It's more like a constant, low hum of anxiety now, but it's always there. I don't go camping anymore. I don't go hunting. I don't even like to take the trash out after dark. My kids don't understand why their dad, the guy who used to know everything about the outdoors, won't go for a walk in the woods with them. I tell them I'm just busy, that my knees aren't what they used to be. It's a lie, of course. The truth is, I'm terrified. I'm afraid of what's out there in the shadows. I'm writing this down now because I need to. I need to get it out. I'm not trying to convince anyone. If you don't believe me, that's fine. In a way, I envy you. I wish I could go back to not believing. I wish I could go back to being the man who felt safe in the forest. But I can't. That man is gone. He died that day in the cedar swamp. What I want is to warn people. If you spend time in the deep woods, be careful. Pay attention. Listen to that little voice in the back of your head that tells you something is wrong. Trust your instincts, because we are not at the top of the food chain. Not everywhere. There are things in the dark places of the world that are older and stronger than we are. And they are watching. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. A bear doesn't have a wolf's head. A bear doesn't run on two legs to chase a truck going 40 miles an hour. A bear doesn't look at you with intelligent, calculating eyes. And a bear doesn't leave deep, five-fingered claw marks in the hood of a Ford F-150. This was something else, something that science refuses to acknowledge, something that folklore has been warning us about for centuries. I still live in northern Michigan. I love this place. But my world is smaller now. My world ends where the pavement turns to dirt. It ends where the street lights stop and the deep, dark woods begin. I know what's in there, and I am never going back. Never. The psychological toll is something I struggle with every day. It's not just the fear, it's the isolation. It's knowing something so profound, so world-altering, and not being able to share it. It's like being the only one who knows the world isn't round. Everyone else goes about their lives in blissful ignorance, and you're left with this terrible secret. It changes how you see everything. When I drive past a stretch of forest now, I don't see beauty. I see cover. I see a place where things can hide. I see the darkness between the trees, and I wonder what's looking back out. My relationship with Sarah has been strained. She's a patient woman, a saint really, but she doesn't understand the man I've become. She misses the old me, the confident, easygoing guy who would pack up the family and go camping for a weekend on a whim. I miss him too. We've had arguments about it. She's pushed me to tell her what really happened that day. She knows I'm holding something back. One night, a couple of years after it happened, I tried. We were sitting on the porch after the kids were in bed. It was a quiet summer night. I took a deep breath and I told her. I told her everything about the canine head, the upright posture, the glowing eyes, the impossible speed. I watched her face as I spoke. I saw the concern turn to confusion and then to pity. She didn't say I was lying. She didn't say I was crazy. She just said, "Mark, you were terrified. Your mind was playing tricks on you. It was a bear, and it scared you badly. That's all." She was trying to be kind. She was trying to give me a rational explanation, an anchor to pull me back to the world we both understood. But all it did was push me further away. She didn't believe me. In that moment, I felt a chasm open up between us. I had shared the most traumatic experience of my life, and she had dismissed it as a hallucination. We never spoke of it again. I knew then that I was truly alone with this. That conversation changed something fundamental in our marriage. There's a part of me now that I can never share with her, a part of my reality that she will never accept. We still love each other, but there's a distance that wasn't there before. A shadow of the thing from the woods has fallen over our home. I often think about the creature itself. What was it? Where did it come from? Was it just one? Or are there more of them? A family? A pack? The thought is chilling. I wonder why it chose to reveal itself to me. It had been watching me for weeks. It could have stayed hidden. It could have attacked me at any time, and I would have never seen it coming. Why the confrontation? Was it a territorial display, a warning to get out and stay out? Or was it something more sinister? Was it toying with me, like a cat with a mouse? The intelligence in its eyes is what haunts me the most. This wasn't some mindless beast acting on instinct. It made choices. It chose to step out from behind the tree. It chose to let me see it. It chose to wait for my mistake before it charged. It was a thinking, reasoning being, and that is the most terrifying thing of all. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stumbled, if I had just kept backing away, slowly and calmly. Would it have let me go? Or was the chase always going to happen? Was I just prey all along? These are questions that will never be answered. They just circle in my mind day after day. My senses are different now. I'm hyper aware of my surroundings. I notice things I never did before. The way the wind changes direction, the sudden absence of sound, the scent of things on the air. It's a state of constant low-level vigilance. It's exhausting. It's like that primal part of my brain that screamed at me in the woods is now always on, always scanning for threats. I can't turn it off. I've lost something precious. More than just a job or a hobby. I've lost my sense of peace, my sense of security in the world. I used to believe that if you were smart and prepared, you could handle anything nature threw at you. A blizzard, a bear, getting lost. But I was wrong. There are things out there for which there is no preparation. Things that defy all the rules we think we know. The arrogance of that belief seems foolish to me now. We walk through this world thinking we are the masters of it. We build our cities and our roads, and we cut down the forests, and we believe we have conquered nature. But we haven't. We've just pushed it back into the shadows. And in those shadows, things are waiting. Things that were here long before we were, and will be here long after we're gone. I hope that by sharing this, someone else might be saved from what I went through. Maybe a hunter or a hiker will read this and remember it when the woods suddenly go silent. Maybe they will trust that feeling of being watched and turn back instead of pushing forward. Maybe they will get in their car and lock the doors and drive away, and never know for sure what was watching them from between the trees. And that is a blessing. Not knowing for sure is a blessing, because once you know, once you have seen it with your own eyes, you can never unknow it. You can never unsee it. It becomes a part of you, a dark corner of your mind that you can never fully illuminate again. It's a heavy burden to carry, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. So please, be safe out there. The world is not what you think it is, and you are not as safe as you believe yourself to be. Trust me, I know. My name, for the purpose of this story, doesn't matter. Let's just say I'm someone who saw something he shouldn't have. Someone who can't forget it. I'm telling this because I have to. Not for fame, not for belief, but because carrying it alone has become too heavy a burden. It happened about 15 years ago. I was in my late 20s, living in a small house nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains of western North Carolina. It wasn't just a house, it was my home. My grandfather built it with his own two hands on a piece of land that had been in our family for generations. He was a carpenter, a man who believed in solid foundations and honest work. He built the house out of oak and poplar felled from the property itself. The walls were thick. The foundation was stone. It was a fortress of a home, meant to stand against time and weather. And for all my life, it had been the safest place I knew. I inherited it after he passed. Living there felt like honoring him. I worked as a carpenter myself, a trade I'd picked up from him, working in a small town about a 40-minute drive away. But the property, that was my sanctuary. The house sat at the end of a long, winding gravel driveway, nearly a mile from the nearest paved road. You couldn't see another house from my porch. You couldn't hear another soul unless they were coming up your drive. The woods were my neighbors, ancient, dense forest that crowded in on all sides. Towering oaks, hickories, and maples that formed a thick canopy overhead in the summer. In the winter, their bare branches looked like a tangled web of gray against the sky. I knew those woods. I'd spent my entire childhood playing in them, building forts and exploring the creeks that snaked through the hollers. As an adult, I didn't venture as deep as I used to, but I was comfortable with them. They were a known quantity. I knew the sounds of a deer stepping through the underbrush. I knew the call of a barred owl asking, "Who cooks for you?" in the dead of night. I knew the rustle that meant a raccoon was getting into the trash cans again. The woods were alive, but they were a life I understood, or so I thought. The house itself was simple. A main floor with a kitchen, a living room, and my bedroom. A wide covered porch wrapped around the front, with two rocking chairs that had been my grandmother's. Out back, about 50 yards from the house, was the workshop. My grandfather had built that too. It was a large, sturdy building, almost a barn, where he kept his tools and I kept mine. It had its own power, its own wood stove. The path between the house and the workshop was worn into the earth from decades of use. This geography is important, the layout of my own home, because every foot of that distance is burned into my memory. The night it happened was in late October. The air had that sharp, clean bite of coming winter. The last of the leaves had fallen, carpeting the ground in a thick, crunchy layer of brown and gold. It was a weeknight, a Tuesday, I think. I got home from work just as the sun was setting, painting the western ridges in shades of orange and purple. The routine was always the same. Park my old Ford truck next to the workshop, go inside the house, change out of my work clothes, make some dinner, sit on the porch for a while as the last light faded from the sky. That night was no different. I ate a simple meal of stew I'd made over the weekend. I remember sitting in one of those rocking chairs, just listening to the world settle down for the night. The crickets were still chirping, a stubborn chorus against the encroaching cold. A bullfrog croaked from the small pond down the hill. The sounds were familiar, comforting. They were the soundtrack of my peace. After a while, the chill started to get into my bones, so I went inside. I probably watched some television, read a book. The details are fuzzy because it was just another night. There was no sense of foreboding, no premonition. The world was exactly as it should be. Around 10 o'clock, I remembered I had left a few tools out in the workshop. Some chisels I'd been sharpening. I didn't want to leave them out on the bench where the night moisture might get to them. It was a habit ingrained in me by my grandfather. Take care of your tools, and they'll take care of you. So I pulled on my boots and a heavy jacket. I didn't even think to grab a flashlight. There was a brilliant moon that night, a nearly full hunter's moon. It bathed the property in a cold, silvery light. You could see almost as well as if it were dusk. The yard between the house and the workshop was clearly illuminated. The shadows under the trees were deep and dark, but the open space was bright. I stepped off the back porch. The cold air hit my face. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of wood smoke from my chimney and damp leaves. Normal smells. The walk to the workshop was short, 150 feet maybe. I'd walked it thousands of times, day and night. My feet knew the way. I reached the workshop, slid the heavy wooden door open just enough to slip inside, and flipped on the lights. The familiar scent of sawdust and oil filled my nostrils. I gathered the chisels, wrapped them in their canvas roll, and placed them in their drawer. I looked around, a final check. Everything was in its place. I switched off the lights, stepped back out, and slid the door shut. And that's when the night began to change. It was subtle at first, so subtle that I almost missed it. As I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes readjust to the moonlight, I noticed something, or rather a lack of something. The crickets had stopped. The bullfrog was silent. The entire constant livin' hum of the forest had just ceased. It wasn't a gradual fading. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. One moment, the air was filled with the sounds of 1,000 tiny lives. The next, there was only a profound and unnerving silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, that presses in on you. I've been in the woods my whole life. I know that silence. It means a predator is near, a big one. My first thought was a coyote, or maybe a bobcat. We had them in the area. It was not unusual for them to pass through. I stood perfectly still, scanning the edge of the woods that bordered the yard. The moonlight made everything black and white, a world of sharp contrasts. The tree line was a solid wall of impenetrable darkness. I listened. The only sound was the faint whisper of a breeze through the bare branches high above, and my own breathing. After a minute that felt like 5, I told myself I was being spooked by nothing. An owl flying overhead could silence the woods for a moment. A fox on the prowl. It was normal. I took a step towards the house. The crunch of my boot on the fallen leaves sounded like a firecracker in the stillness. I froze again. Listened. Nothing. Just that immense, listening silence. It was then that I felt it. A feeling that's hard to describe, but impossible to mistake. The feeling of being watched. It was a primal instinct, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The kind of awareness that makes the hair on your arms stand up. I slowly turned my head, scanning the entire perimeter of the clearing. The woods to my left, the long, dark stretch of the gravel driveway ahead, the woods to my right. Nothing moved. It was a perfect, still portrait of a moonlit night. But the feeling persisted. It was a focused, intense pressure. I felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. My heart started to beat a little faster. My rational mind was at war with my animal brain. "It's just the dark," my rational mind said. "You're letting your imagination get the better of you." "Danger!" my animal brain screamed. "You're being hunted." I decided to trust my rational mind. I forced myself to take another step, and another. I walked slowly, deliberately, trying to project an air of calm I did not feel. My eyes were glued to the tree line. I was about halfway to the house when the second strange thing happened. A smell. It drifted on the breeze, and it was wrong. It wasn't the smell of a skunk or a dead animal or anything I could readily identify. It was thick, musky, like a wet dog, but magnified 100 times. There was an undercurrent to it, too. Something foul, like rotting meat left in the sun, and something else, something sharp and metallic, like old blood. The smell was nauseating. It came in a wave, then dissipated, then came back stronger. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A bear? We had black bears, and they could smell pretty ripe. But this was different. This smelled unclean, infected. I stopped again right in the middle of the yard. The house and the safety of its locked door were still a good 70 feet away. The workshop was 70 feet behind me. I was exposed. I scanned the woods again, more urgently this time. The feeling of being watched was no longer a general sensation. It was coming from a specific direction. From the right, near where the driveway met the thicker part of the forest. I stared into that patch of darkness, trying to make my eyes pierce the shadows. The moonlight didn't penetrate there. It was just a void. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that something was in there, and it was looking right at me. My blood ran cold. The fight or flight response was screaming through my veins, but I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, a statue in the moonlight, staring at the spot where I knew my observer was hidden. Then I heard a sound. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sound of a heavy foot pressing down on dry leaves. A single, deliberate step. It wasn't the light-footed tread of a deer. It wasn't the shuffle of a bear. It was heavy, weighted, like a large man trying to move quietly. And it came from the exact spot I was staring at. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This is it, I thought. This is how it ends. Some psycho hiding in the woods. The stories you hear about, but never believe could happen to you. But the smell didn't fit with a person. I should have run. I should have screamed. I should have done anything but what I did next. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. So is disbelief. I needed to see. I needed to know what was making that sound. What was watching me. I thought about the big, heavy-duty flashlight I kept in my truck. A maglite, the kind that takes 4 D-cell batteries. My truck was parked right next to the workshop. Behind me, I would have to turn my back on whatever was in the woods. I couldn't do it. I had a smaller flashlight in the house, on the kitchen counter, in front of me. But the house felt a million miles away. So I just stood there, unarmed, in the cold, under the too bright moon, and I waited. Another minute passed, or maybe it was a lifetime. The silence stretched on, taut and fragile. Then another sound, a soft snap, the sound of a twig breaking under immense weight. Closer this time. It had moved. It was coming out of the deep shadows. My body finally reacted. I took a single shuffling step backward, away from the sound, toward the workshop. It was a mistake. The movement, as small as it was, seemed to be a trigger. From the wall of blackness, a shape began to detach itself. It wasn't a sudden movement. It was a slow, deliberate separation of one darkness from a greater darkness. At first, my brain couldn't process it. It was just a patch of night that was darker than the rest. A hole in the world. It moved into a space where a sliver of moonlight cut through the canopy. And I saw it. My mind has tried to erase the image 1,000 times since that night. But it's burned onto the back of my eyelids. It was tall. Impossibly tall. My first rational thought was that it was a bear standing on its hind legs. We have big black bears in those mountains. A large male standing up could be 6, maybe even 7 feet tall. This was taller. It was standing near a fence post that I knew was 5 feet high. The top of the post barely came to its waist. It had to be 8, maybe 9 feet tall, and it wasn't shaped like a bear. Bears are bulky, roundish. This was structured. It had broad, powerful shoulders, wider than any man I'd ever seen. It had long, muscular arms that hung down at its sides, the hands reaching almost to its knees. And they were hands, not paws. I could see the shape of long, thick fingers. Its legs were what truly broke my understanding of the world. They were bent, but not like a human's legs. They were bent backward, like the hind legs of a dog or a wolf, a digitigrade stance. I didn't know the word for it then, but I saw it. It was standing on two legs, but they were the legs of an animal. It was covered in fur, dark, shaggy fur that looked black in the moonlight, mottled with patches of gray or brown. It was matted and coarse, not the soft, dense coat of a bear, but the head. Oh God, the head! That was the nexus of the nightmare. It was not the head of a bear, or an ape, or a man. It was the head of a wolf, a monstrous, oversized wolf. It had a long, tapered snout. I could see the line of its jaw, the powerful muscles that worked it. On top of its head were two pointed ears, tall and alert. They swiveled independently, catching sounds I couldn't hear. It turned its head slightly to look at me more directly, and I saw its eyes. In the pale moonlight, they seemed to have their own faint luminosity, a sickly yellow gold color. They were not the simple, reflective eyes of a nocturnal animal caught in a beam of light. They were intelligent. They were analytical. They were looking at me, and I could feel the malevolent appraisal in that gaze. It was sizing me up, assessing me. The foul, gagging smell I'd noticed earlier washed over me again, stronger than ever. It was coming from this thing, this impossibility, standing not 30 yards from me. Time stopped. My entire world, my entire existence, narrowed to the space between me and that creature. Every rational explanation my brain tried to offer was shot down by the evidence of my own eyes. It's a man in a costume. No costume moves like that. No man is that tall, that broad. The legs? You can't fake those legs. It's a bear with mange. No, bears don't have wolf heads. They don't have hands. They don't stand with that perfect, unnatural posture. I'm dreaming. I'm having a hallucination. But the cold was real. The smell was real. The terror coiling in my gut was devastatingly real. We stood there, locked in this silent, horrific tableau. The monster in the moonlight, and the man who had stumbled into a world he never knew existed. Its head tilted slightly, a gesture of curiosity. A low sound rumbled in its chest. It wasn't a growl, not yet. It was a deep, guttural vibration, a sound that felt more than heard. It vibrated through the soles of my boots. Its lips, dark and leathery, parted slightly, and I saw the glint of teeth, long yellow canines, like daggers. My body was a traitor. My legs were locked. My throat was closed. I couldn't even draw a breath to scream. My mind was a frantic swirl of denial and abject horror. This can't be real. This is not happening. But it was. It was real, and it was watching me, and I knew, with the kind of primal certainty that bypasses all logic, that I was prey. I don't know how long we stood there. It could have been 10 seconds. It could have been 10 minutes. In that moment, time had no meaning. There was only the cold, the silence, and the steady, intelligent gaze of the monster. I remember a single desperate thought cutting through the panic. Don't show fear. Animals can smell fear. Don't run. Running triggers the chase instinct. So I stood my ground, frozen not by choice, but by terror. The creature took a step, a slow, deliberate step forward, out of the partial shadow and into the full stark glare of the moon. It moved with a terrifying grace, a fluid, predatory silence that belied its immense size. With that one step, it closed the distance between us by 6 or 7 feet. I could see more details now, the matted fur on its chest, the sheer bulk of its thighs, the way the moonlight glinted off what looked like long black claws at the ends of its fingers. It stopped again, its head low, its shoulders hunched. Its posture was that of a wolf about to charge. And then it did something that shattered the last of my composure. It raised one of its long arms, slowly. It pointed a single, claw-tipped finger at me. It wasn't an animal gesture. It was a human gesture, a gesture of identification, of accusation. I see you. That's what it felt like, and that's when the terror finally broke my paralysis. Somehow, my body found the ability to move. I took another step backward, and another. My retreat was slow, clumsy. I was trying not to make any sudden moves. The creature watched me, its head tracking my every motion. The pointing hand slowly lowered. The low rumble in its chest grew louder, morphing into a true growl, a sound of pure, unrestrained malice that echoed in the unnatural quiet of the night. I knew I had to run. My mind raced. The house? Too far. I'd never make it. It would be on me before I reached the porch steps. The workshop. It was closer, behind me. I would have to turn my back on it. The thought was terrifying, but it was my only chance. I took one last look at the thing. Its yellow eyes burned into mine. It took another step forward, and then another, quicker this time. It was closing the distance. Now or never. I broke, I turned, and I ran. The world dissolved into a blur of motion and pure, adrenaline-fueled panic. My legs pumped, my arms churned. I ran harder than I have ever run in my life. The 70 feet to the workshop felt like a mile. Behind me, I heard a sound that will haunt my nightmares forever. An explosive snarl, a roar of fury, and the thunder of heavy footfalls hitting the earth. It was chasing me. The ground shook with its pursuit. It wasn't running like a man. It was covering the ground in huge, powerful leaps. I could hear the dry leaves scattering, the impact of its feet like sledgehammers. I risked a glance over my shoulder. That was a mistake. It was no longer running on 2 legs. It had dropped to all 4s, and it was moving with the terrifying, impossible speed of a nightmare. Its head was low, its massive shoulders pumping. It was a black galloping shadow, eating up the ground between us. The distance was shrinking at an alarming rate. It was going to get me. The smell was overpowering now, a suffocating wave of rot and musk. I could hear its breathing, harsh, rasping, guttural pants that sounded like a bellows. I didn't scream. I didn't have the air. Every ounce of my being was focused on one thing, the workshop door. 10 feet away, 5 feet. I could feel its presence right behind me. I could feel the heat coming off its body. I reached the door, my hand slapping against the rough wood. I didn't even try for the handle. I just threw my shoulder into it, using my forward momentum. The heavy door slid open with a groan. I stumbled inside, into the pitch-black darkness of the workshop. I spun around, grabbing the edge of the door to pull it shut. As the gap narrowed, I saw it. It was right there. It rose back up onto its hind legs, filling the entire doorway. Its face was inches from mine. The yellow eyes blazed with a furious light. Its snout was wrinkled in a snarl, its lips pulled back to reveal gums as black as tar and teeth as long as my fingers. A hot, foul breath washed over my face, and I gagged. It reached for me. A huge, clawed hand swiped at my head. I threw myself backward as I pulled the door. The claws scraped against the wood, sending splinters flying. The door slammed shut with a deafening boom. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, found the deadbolt. It was a heavy, solid steel bolt my grandfather had installed. I threw it home. The click of the bolt locking was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. The instant it was locked, the door exploded inward. An impact of unimaginable force struck the center of the door, making the entire building shudder. The wood groaned, but it held. I scrambled backward on my hands and feet, crab-walking away from the door, my eyes wide with terror. Boom! Another impact. This time, a crack appeared in one of the thick oak planks. Dust and splinters rained down from the doorframe. From the other side, I heard a sound of pure, frustrated rage, a high-pitched, screaming howl that was part wolf, part man, and all monster. It was a sound of thwarted bloodlust. It terrified me, but it also gave me a sliver of hope. It was angry because it couldn't get in. I kept scrambling backward until my back hit the solid legs of my grandfather's heavy workbench. I huddled behind it, trying to make myself as small as possible. I was in complete darkness. I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear. I could hear the thing outside. It wasn't banging on the door anymore. It was circling the workshop. I could hear its heavy, pacing footsteps in the dry leaves. Step, step, step. The sound was slow, deliberate, predatory. It was hunting for a way in. Then came a new sound, a scraping, the sound of claws dragging against the wooden siding of the building. It was testing the walls. Sniffing sounds followed, loud, wet, snuffling noises, right at the cracks in the walls. It could smell me. It knew I was in here. The scraping moved to the single window on the side of the workshop. It was a small, high window, reinforced with thick glass. I heard a claw tap against the pane. A tap, tap, tap. It was testing it. Then a sharp crack. My heart leaped into my throat. But the glass held. A low growl of frustration followed. The footsteps resumed their slow, circling patrol. I stayed huddled behind the workbench, my arms wrapped around my head, my body trembling uncontrollably. I was trapped. The only thing between me and that thing was a few inches of oak and glass. I thought about my phone. It was in my jacket pocket. But who could I call? Hello, 911. There's a 9-foot-tall wolf man trying to break into my workshop. They would think I was drunk or crazy. By the time they navigated the long driveway, it would be too late. I was on my own. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Every creak of the building, every rustle of leaves outside sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. The circling footsteps continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes they would stop beneath the window. Sometimes they would stop at the door, and I'd hear that low, menacing growl. It was a war of attrition. It was waiting for me. I started to pray. I wasn't a religious man, but in that darkness with that thing outside, I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. I prayed for the sun to come up. I prayed for it to go away. I prayed for this to be a nightmare that I would wake up from. At some point, the sounds outside changed. The pacing stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear. Silence, the same profound, heavy silence from before. Had it gone? Had it given up? I didn't dare to hope. I stayed where I was, not moving a muscle. Minutes passed. No footsteps, no growling, no scraping, just silence. I stayed curled up behind that workbench for the rest of the night. I was too terrified to move. Every shadow was the creature. Every sound was its return. I must have drifted into a state of shock because I don't remember the passage of time. The next thing I was aware of was a faint, gray light seeping through the cracked window. Dawn was coming. I had survived the night. The first rays of morning light brought with them the return of the world's natural sounds. A bird chirped, then another. Soon the forest was alive with the morning chorus, the sounds of normalcy. But I still didn't move. I waited until the sun was fully up, until the workshop was filled with the bright, unambiguous light of day. Even then, it took me another hour to work up the courage to leave my hiding place. My legs were stiff and cramped. My body ached. I was shivering, not from cold, but from the lingering shock. I crept to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. Just the sound of birds. With a hand that trembled so badly I could barely control it, I reached for the deadbolt. It slid back with a loud thud that made me jump. I took a deep breath, and I slid the door open, just a crack. Bright sunlight flooded in. The air smelled clean and cold, of damp earth and leaves. The monster smell was gone. I peered out. The yard was empty. The woods looked just as they always had. It was as if nothing had happened. Was it possible? Did I imagine it all? A waking nightmare brought on by stress and an overactive imagination? I stepped out of the workshop, my eyes scanning every shadow. And then I saw the proof. The door, the heavy oak door of the workshop, was savaged. There were 3 long, deep gouges running diagonally across it, splintering the thick wood. They were not marks a bear could make. They were too thin, too deep, too precise, like someone had taken a sharpened pickaxe to it. And near the center of the door was a spider web of cracks radiating out from a point of impact, the spot where it had slammed its body against the wood. My eyes followed the ground. In the soft, damp dirt next to the workshop's foundation, there was a footprint. My breath caught in my throat. It was huge, easily 16 inches long. It was not a human print. It was not a bear track. It was shaped like the paw of a canine, with 4 distinct toe pads and the mark of claws in the dirt. But it was elongated. The heel was pressed deep into the earth. It was the footprint of a creature that walked on the balls of its feet, like a dog, but could also stand flat-footed, like a man. I stood there staring at it, and the reality of the night came crashing back down on me. It was real, all of it. I stumbled back to the house on legs made of jelly. I locked the door behind me, checking the lock 3, 4, 5 times. I went through the house, checking every window, pulling every curtain. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, but the safety of my home was gone. It had been violated, shattered. I didn't know what to do. I sat at my kitchen table, shaking for hours. I tried to call my brother later that day. He lived a few towns over. I tried to tell him what happened. My voice was shaky. I was barely coherent. "I saw something," I said. "Something in the woods." He listened. I described the height, the shape, the wolf head. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jake," he said, his voice gentle, like he was talking to a child. "You've been working too hard. You were probably tired. It was dark." No, I insisted. I saw it. There's damage on the workshop door. There's a footprint. It was a bear, he said with finality. A big one, probably. Got spooked, ran into your door. You got scared. It's understandable. A bear. He wasn't listening. He didn't want to listen. The explanation was too simple, too neat. It dismissed everything. The intelligent eyes, the impossible anatomy, the gesture of it pointing at me. It wasn't a bear, I said, my voice quiet. Okay, Jake, he said, his tone placating. Whatever you say. Why don't you get some rest? Maybe come stay with us for a couple of days. I hung up the phone. I was completely and utterly alone with this. I never told anyone else. Not my family, not my friends. Who would believe me? They would think I was crazy. They would look at me with pity in their eyes. The ridicule would be unbearable. But the knowledge of what was out there was even worse. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't sleep in that house anymore. Every night, when the sun went down, the terror would return. I would sit in the dark, a shotgun across my lap, listening. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl was it, coming back for me. The woods I had loved my whole life had become a wall of menace. The familiar sounds were no longer comforting. They were a countdown to the return of that terrible silence. I lasted 2 weeks, 2 weeks of sleepless nights, of jumping at every shadow, of living in a constant state of high alert. I lost weight. I couldn't eat. I stopped going to work. I was falling apart. One morning, after another night spent staring into the darkness, I made a decision. I packed a bag, just one. I walked out of the house my grandfather had built, and I didn't look back. I drove to my brother's house and told him I needed to stay for a while. I put the property on the market a month later. I sold it for a loss to a development company from out of state. I didn't care. I just wanted it gone. I never set foot on that land again. I moved into a small apartment in town, an apartment on the 3rd floor with neighbors on all sides, with streetlights that burned all night long. I've lived in town ever since. It has been 15 years, but the fear has never truly left me. It's a part of me now. I don't go into the woods. I don't camp or hike. I don't even like to drive on rural roads after dark. My friends think I've just become a city person. They don't understand that I'm not living in the city. I'm hiding in it. I still have nightmares. I see those yellow eyes burning with a cold, ancient intelligence. I hear that enraged, screaming howl. I feel that hot, foul breath on my face. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think I can smell it. That faint, musky odor of wet fur and decay. And the old panic comes rushing back. I'm telling this story now because I need to. I'm not trying to convince anyone. If you haven't seen what I've seen, you will never truly believe it. And I can't blame you for that. I wouldn't have believed it either. But I know what I saw. I have lived in Appalachia my entire life. I know the animals that live here. I know what a bear looks like. I know what a coyote sounds like. I know the track of a deer and the path of a bobcat. What I saw that night was not an animal that appears in any biology textbook. Bears don't stand 9 feet tall with the grace of a man. They don't have the legs of a canine. They don't have hands with long, grasping fingers. They don't have the head of a giant wolf. And most of all, they don't have that look in their eyes, that look of cold, calculating intelligence, of a thinking, reasoning being that is looking at you not as a threat, but as meat. This was something else, something ancient, something that has been living in the dark, hidden places of the world, just beyond our sight, something that we, in our modern, well-lit world, have forgotten how to fear. I was a man who felt at home in the wilderness. I felt safe in the solitude. That night, I learned that the wilderness is not ours. We are just visitors, and sometimes we overstay our welcome. So, if you live in a quiet, isolated place, surrounded by the woods, listen to this story. And when the crickets suddenly go silent on a moonlit night, don't try to rationalize it. Don't tell yourself it's just the wind. Go inside, lock your door, and pray you are not what the silence is for. The world is older and stranger than we think, and there are things in the shadows that have been there for a very, very long time, and they are hungry, I know, because I met one, and I was lucky enough to walk away. Many people, I suspect, are not. That is my story. It is the truth, every word of it, and I will carry it with me until my dying day. Name withheld. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. No matter where you are in the world, no matter what time of day or night it may be, I sincerely hope you are doing well. I hope you're feeling safe. For those of you who are new here, what we do is share stories. These are first-hand accounts sent in by listeners. These are experiences from regular people, people just like you and me, who found themselves in a situation they could not explain. We don't try to provide answers here. We don't push any conclusions. We simply present the experience as it was told, allowing the story to speak for itself. The world is a very large, very old place, and there are some things that defy our neat and tidy understanding of how it's supposed to work. If you've had an experience like the ones we share on this channel, something that has stuck with you, I encourage you to write it down and send it in. My email address is in the description of this video. Sharing your story can be a way to process it, and it lets others who have gone through something similar know that they are not alone. Now, for the rest of you, it's that time. Grab your drink of choice. Lock your doors and your windows. Turn down the lights. Settle in, and let's begin. My name isn't important. What happened is, I'm in my early 40s now, but this took place about 10 years ago. I was 33. I've only ever told two people the full story. My wife and a therapist who I think believed I was suffering from a complex post-traumatic stress delusion. Maybe I am, but I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know how it felt. My grandfather passed away when I was 25. He was a quiet, sturdy man, born and raised in the deep woods of northern Maine. He left me the one thing he truly valued in the world, his cabin. It wasn't much, just a small one-room structure with a sleeping loft, a pot-bellied stove, and a screened-in porch. He built it himself in the 1960s on a 40-acre plot of dense pine and birch forest he'd bought for a song. To me, that cabin was more than just wood and nails. It was my sanctuary. I'd been going there with him since I was a boy. He taught me how to track deer, how to find my way with a compass, how to identify edible plants, and how to respect the woods. He taught me that the forest had its own rules, its own life, and that you were a guest in its home. I never forgot that. After he was gone, I kept up the tradition. Every spring I'd go up to open the cabin, and every autumn, usually in late October, I'd make the trip to close it down for the winter. It was a ritual. Drain the water pump, stack firewood on the porch, board up the two small windows, and lock the heavy oak door. It was a long drive from my home in Massachusetts, nearly 6 hours, but I always looked forward to it. It was a chance to disconnect, to breathe clean air, and to feel close to my grandfather. That year was no different, or so I thought. I took a Friday off from work and headed north. The drive was beautiful. The last vestiges of autumn color were clinging to the trees, a blaze of orange and red against the deep green of the pines. I listened to music, stopped at my usual spot for a coffee and a sandwich, and felt the stress of my city life slowly melting away with each mile that passed. The last hour of the drive is on a network of logging roads. They're unpaved, rutted, and in the fall, they're usually slick with a layer of damp, decaying leaves. My truck handled them fine. I'd made this trip 100 times. I knew every turn, every pothole, every place where you were likely to see a moose standing in the middle of the road. When I finally pulled up to the small clearing where the cabin stood, it was late afternoon. The sun was already low in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees. The air was crisp and cold, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth. It smelled like home. I got out of the truck and just stood there for a minute, breathing it all in. The silence was the first thing you noticed. Not a dead silence, but a living one. The whisper of wind in the pines, the distant caw of a crow, the scolding chatter of a squirrel. It was a symphony I knew by heart. The cabin looked just as I'd left it in the spring, solid, unassuming, a part of the landscape. I unlocked the heavy padlock on the door, swung it open, and was greeted by the familiar scent of old wood, wood smoke, and a hint of mothballs. The first task was always the same: get a fire going. The cabin would be cold, a deep, penetrating cold that settled in the bones. I brought in an armload of kindling and split logs from the woodshed out back and got to work. Soon the pot-bellied stove was roaring, its warmth slowly pushing back the chill. I spent the next hour or so just settling in. I unpacked my food, unrolled my sleeping bag in the loft, and tidied up a bit. It was a simple, comforting routine. As dusk began to settle in earnest, I stepped out onto the screened-in porch with a hot cup of tea. This was my favorite time of day up here. The transition, the world shifting from light to dark, the colors of the forest deepening, the shadows merging, the first stars beginning to prick the darkening sky. I sat in my grandfather's old rocking chair, listening to the woods settle in for the night. That's when I noticed the first thing that was off. It was the silence, not the peaceful, living silence from before. This was different. This was a dead silence. The wind had died down. The squirrels were quiet. No birds, nothing. It was like someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the entire forest. The only sound was the crackle of the fire inside the cabin and the soft creak of my rocking chair. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that this kind of sudden, absolute quiet usually means one thing: a predator is nearby. A bobcat, maybe a coyote, or a bear. I wasn't particularly worried. I'd seen all of them up here before. As long as you respected them and didn't do anything stupid, they'd leave you alone. I sat there, listening, scanning the tree line at the edge of the clearing. The light was failing fast, and the woods were becoming a wall of black. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. After a few minutes, the tension began to feel a little foolish. It was probably just a deer passing through quietly. I finished my tea, my breath pluming in the cold air, and decided to call it a night. I had a full day of work ahead of me tomorrow. I went inside, bolted the door, and climbed the ladder to the loft. The cabin was warm now, cozy. The firelight danced on the wooden walls. I felt safe, secure. I fell asleep easily, cocooned in my sleeping bag, listening to the comforting hiss and pop of the stove. I woke up a few hours later. I wasn't sure why. It wasn't a sound that woke me. It was a feeling, a deep, primal feeling of being watched. My eyes snapped open. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a faint, pulsing red light throughout the cabin. It was completely silent. The dead silence from earlier was back. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. Nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was alone in the middle of nowhere. Of course, my city-dweller brain was going to play tricks on me. I rolled over, trying to go back to sleep. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was a physical sensation, like a pressure on my skin. The hairs on my arms were standing on end. Then I heard it, a single heavy footstep on the porch. My blood ran cold. It wasn't the light skittering sound of a raccoon or a porcupine. It was heavy, deliberate, the sound of something with significant weight. A bear, I thought. It must be a bear, curious about the smells from the cabin. I held my breath, listening. For a long moment, there was nothing. I started to think I'd imagined it. Then I heard it again, a slow, scraping sound, like claws dragging across the wooden planks of the porch. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I knew the porch door was latched, but it was just a simple hook and eye. It wouldn't stop a determined bear. The main cabin door was solid oak, with a heavy deadbolt. I was safe in here, as long as I stayed quiet, as long as it didn't try to get through the windows. But the windows were just glass. I hadn't boarded them up yet. That was a job for tomorrow. That was a mistake. I heard another sound, a low, deep sniffing. It was right outside the front wall of the cabin, near the door. It was a wet, guttural sound, and it was followed by a huff of air, so powerful it sounded like a blacksmith's bellows. It was too loud for a bear. The sheer lung capacity it suggested was terrifying. I slowly, carefully eased myself out of my sleeping bag. The floorboards in the loft were old, and they creaked. I moved with an agonizing slowness, trying to distribute my weight as evenly as possible. My grandfather had an old, single-shot 12-gauge shotgun that he kept in a locked case under the cot in the loft. I didn't have the key. He'd given it to me years ago, attached to the cabin key ring. It was downstairs, in the pocket of my jacket, hanging on a peg by the door. Useless. All I had was a heavy Maglite flashlight. I grabbed it, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold on. The sniffing sound moved along the wall, towards the first window. This window was on the side of the cabin, facing into the dense woods. I was in the loft, directly above it. I could hear the thing moving. It wasn't walking like a bear on all fours. It sounded like it was walking on 2 feet. A heavy, shuffling gait. Thump, shuffle. Thump, shuffle. My mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. A moose? No, a moose wouldn't be on the porch. A person? A hunter lost in the woods? Why would they be sneaking around my cabin in the middle of the night, making those sounds? It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. The shuffling stopped directly beneath the window. I heard that sniffing sound again, closer this time, right at the level of the window pane. Then I heard a soft tick, 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 the sound of a claw tapping against the glass. I was paralyzed with a fear so absolute, it was like nothing I had ever experienced. It was a cold, chemical dread that flooded my entire body. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. All I could do was listen. The tapping stopped. There was a long, drawn-out silence, the kind of silence that feels loud. I was praying to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in that it would just go away, that it would lose interest and wander back into the forest. Then the smell hit me. It was faint at first, just a hint seeping through the old chinking between the logs. But it grew stronger. It was a thick, gag-inducing odor, like a wet dog, but multiplied by 1,000. It was musky, rank, with an undercurrent of something rotting, something like spoiled meat. The smell filled the small cabin, and I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to keep from retching. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that this was not a bear. A bear smells bad, sure, but this was different. This was the smell of something ancient and wrong. I had to see. I had to know what was out there. It was a terrible, compulsive thought. I knew it was a bad idea, but the not knowing was somehow worse than the fear itself. The loft had a small opening that overlooked the main room, right at the front of the cabin. From there, I could just see the top of the second window, the one next to the front door. I crawled on my belly, my heart a frantic drum against the floorboards, until I could peer over the edge. The embers in the stove still provided a little light, enough to see the layout of the room below. Everything was still, silent. The shuffling sound had moved. It was on the porch again, right in front of that window. I watched the window, my eyes wide, my body tense. For a long time, nothing happened. Just the faint red glow from the stove, the deep black square of the window, and the suffocating silence. And then a shape blotted out the faint starlight in the top corner of the window. It was a head. It was looking in. It was too tall. The bottom of the window was a good 4 feet off the porch floor. For a head to be visible in the top pane, the thing it was attached to had to be enormous, 7 feet tall, maybe more. It was just a silhouette at first, a dark shape against the slightly less dark night. But as my eyes adjusted, and as it shifted its head slightly, the faint, dying light from the stove caught the glint of an eye, and then it caught the shape of the head. It was long, a long canine snout. Pointed ears stood erect on top of its head, silhouetted against the night sky. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a moose. It wasn't a man. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. It was like a circuit breaker had tripped in my brain. This was impossible. This couldn't be real. The head tilted as if it was listening, as if it could hear the frantic, terrified beating of my heart. It stayed there, perfectly still, for what felt like an eternity, just watching. Its presence filled the entire world. There was nothing else, just me, in this small wooden box, and the impossible thing looking in. I wanted to scream, but my throat was closed. I wanted to run, but my limbs were locked. All I could do was lie there, hidden in the shadows of the loft, watching the silhouette of a nightmare. Then it moved. It lowered its head, disappearing from the window. I heard the heavy footsteps again, moving away from the window, back towards the center of the porch. I heard the creak of a floorboard right in front of the door. It was going to try the door. I scrambled backwards, away from the edge of the loft, pressing myself against the rough-hewn logs of the back wall. The only thing between me and that thing was an oak door and a deadbolt, a good, solid deadbolt. But was it good enough? I heard the doorknob rattle, gently at first, a metallic jiggle, then harder, a violent, angry shake. The whole door vibrated in its frame. My grandfather had built this cabin to last, but it wasn't built for this. The rattling stopped. A low growl rumbled through the wood of the cabin, a sound so deep I felt it in my chest. It wasn't the growl of any animal I had ever heard. It was guttural, full of a terrifying, intelligent malice. Then came the scratching, a sharp, frantic scraping at the door. Not like a bear clawing for purchase, but like something trying to find a weak spot, a seam. It was methodical, intelligent. I was lying on the floor of the loft, clutching the heavy flashlight like a club, my knuckles white. My mind was a chaotic storm of fear and disbelief. I was going to die here, in my grandfather's cabin. This thing was going to tear the door down and kill me, and no one would ever know what happened. They'd find the wreckage. They'd blame a bear. The scratching stopped. There was another long silence. I found myself holding my breath again, listening. The silence was broken by a sound that was, in some ways, the most terrifying thing I had heard all night. It was a soft, metallic click. It came from the door. It sounded like someone trying to pick the lock. No, that was impossible. My mind was breaking. I was hallucinating. Animals don't pick locks. Click, jiggle, scrape. It was happening. I could hear the faint, distinct sounds of something being inserted into the keyhole and manipulated. This wasn't just an animal. This wasn't just a monster. This was something that understood how a lock worked. The thought was so alien, so fundamentally wrong, that a wave of nausea washed over me. I had to do something. I couldn't just lie here and wait for it to get in. The shotgun. The key was in my jacket. My jacket was by the door. It was an insane idea. To get the key, I'd have to go down the ladder into the main room, right next to the door it was trying to open. It was suicide, but staying put felt like suicide too. I had to risk it. I slid off the loft floor and onto the top rung of the ladder. My bare feet made no sound on the smooth wood. I descended one rung at a time, my eyes locked on the door. The faint red light from the stove cast just enough of a glow to see the doorknob, to see the dark shape of my jacket hanging on the peg next to it. Click, scrape. The sounds were louder now, closer. My feet touched the cold floor of the main room. I was exposed. There was nowhere to hide. I took a step, then another, moving like a ghost across the room. My hand reached out, my fingers trembling as they closed around the rough fabric of my jacket sleeve. I fumbled for the pocket. My fingers brushed against my wallet, my phone useless, and then the keys. The cold, sharp metal felt like a talisman. I pulled them out, trying to keep them from jingling. Now I had to get back to the loft, back to the shotgun. As my fingers closed around the key ring, there was a loud snap from the lock. It was followed by a sharp, metallic clink as something small and metal fell to the porch floor outside. The growl that came from the other side of the door was not one of anger. It was a growl of frustration, of thwarted effort. It had failed to pick the lock. It had broken whatever tool it was using. A new sound started, a low rhythmic thudding. It was hitting the door. Not a frantic, wild attack, a steady, powerful, calculated assault. Thud! The whole cabin frame shuddered. Thud! A crack appeared in the thick oak panel of the door. Thud! The crack splintered, running from the top of the door to the bottom. It was going to break it down. It was going to get in. I didn't wait. I scrambled back up the ladder, the keys clutched in my fist. I practically threw myself into the loft, landing hard on the floorboards. I crawled to the cot, fumbled with the lock on the gun case, found the right key, and twisted. The lock sprang open. I threw the lid back. The shotgun was there. A beautiful, old thing, with a dark wood stock. My grandfather had kept it clean. Beside it was a box of shells. Buckshot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely function. I broke the action open, fumbled a shell out of the box, and tried to slide it into the chamber. It slipped from my trembling fingers and rolled across the floor. Crack! A huge splinter of wood flew from the inside of the door, landing just feet from the base of the ladder. Daylight was visible through the hole. No, not daylight. Moonlight. The moon had risen. I grabbed another shell. This time I got it in. I snapped the shotgun shut. The sound was deafeningly loud in the small space. A solid, mechanical chunk. For a moment, the pounding on the door stopped. Did it hear? Did it understand what that sound meant? I crawled to the edge of the loft again, the shotgun heavy in my hands. I peered down. A sliver of moonlight now cut across the floor, illuminating a cloud of dust motes kicked up by the impacts. Then I saw it. An eye. It was peering through the crack in the door. It was a single, luminous yellow eye. It wasn't the reflective green of a cat or a deer in a headlight. It was a self-lit, predatory, intelligent yellow, and it was looking right at me. It knew I was there. It had known the whole time. The eye vanished. The pounding resumed, but with a new, terrifying fury. It wasn't just thudding anymore. It was a full-on assault. The wood of the door was groaning, splintering, breaking apart. I aimed the shotgun at the door. What was I going to do? Wait for it to break through and then shoot it? What if I missed? What if one shot wasn't enough? I only had one. It was a single shot. I'd have to reload while a 7-foot-tall monster was in the cabin with me. The top hinge of the door tore loose from the frame with a scream of tortured metal. The door sagged inwards, held only by the bottom hinge and the mangled deadbolt. It was now or never. I wasn't going to fight it. I was going to run. My truck was my only hope. It was parked maybe 30 feet from the front porch. If I could get to it, if I could get it started, I might have a chance. There was a back door in the cabin, leading out of the small kitchen area. It was a flimsier door, one I never used. But it was on the opposite side of the cabin from the porch. It was my only way out. I slid back from the edge of the loft, shotgun in hand. I had to get down the ladder, but the ladder was right next to the front door. The door that was about to give way. Crunch! The entire top half of the door caved in. A massive dark shoulder forced its way through the opening, followed by a long, fur-covered arm. The smell, the awful rotten meat and wet fur smell, flooded the cabin. I didn't think. I just moved. I swung my legs over the side of the loft and dropped. It was a 10-foot drop to the floor. I landed hard, my ankles screaming in protest. The shotgun clattered to the floor beside me. I ignored the pain. I grabbed the gun and scrambled on my hands and knees towards the back of the cabin. I could hear it now, tearing the rest of the door apart. The sound of splintering wood and a low, victorious growl. I reached the back door, fumbled with the simple slide bolt, and pulled it open. Cold night air hit my face. I didn't look back. I burst out into the night and ran. The ground was uneven, littered with roots and rocks. I was in my bare feet. I didn't care. I ran blindly, heading for the side of the cabin, for the front where my truck was parked. The moon was bright, casting everything in a stark silver and black relief. I rounded the corner of the cabin and saw it. It was standing on the ruined porch, halfway out of the shattered doorway. It was pulling its other shoulder through the frame, and it was huge, taller than I had imagined. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, its limbs long and corded with muscle under a coat of coarse dark fur. It stood on two legs, slightly hunched, like a man burdened by a terrible weight. It turned its head, and for the first time I saw its face clearly in the moonlight. The long, canine muzzle, the pointed ears, the glowing yellow eyes. It was a wolf's head, but it was on the body of a giant, misshapen man. Its lips were pulled back in a snarl, revealing a row of long, yellow fangs. A thick strand of saliva dripped from its jaw. It saw me. The yellow eyes locked onto mine. In that instant I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated terror that almost made my heart stop. This wasn't an animal. The look in its eyes was not the simple predation of a wolf or a bear. It was a cold, calculating, ancient hatred. It hated me. It wanted me dead. It let out a roar, not a growl, a roar, a deafening, guttural sound that tore through the quiet night and echoed off the trees. It was a sound of pure rage and power. Then it launched itself off the porch. It cleared the 5 steps in a single bound, landing on the ground with a heavy thud. It didn't land on all 4s. It landed on 2 feet, and then it started running. Towards me. I have never run so fast in my life. Adrenaline surged through me, dulling the pain in my ankles, my feet. The truck was so close. So close. 20 feet. 15. I could hear it behind me. The heavy pounding footfalls, the guttural snarling breaths. It was faster than me. Much faster. I could feel the ground shake with its steps. It was closing the distance. I reached the driver's side door of the truck, my hands fumbling with the shotgun. I didn't have the keys. The keys to the truck were on the same ring as the cabin keys. They were in my pocket. I threw the shotgun into the truck bed, jammed my hand in my pocket, and pulled out the keys. My fingers were numb, clumsy. I couldn't separate the truck key from the others. A hot, foul breath washed over the back of my neck. I didn't dare look back. I found the key, jammed it into the lock, and twisted. The door unlocked with a click. I yanked the handle and threw myself inside, pulling the door shut behind me. Slam! An instant later, a massive impact struck the driver's side window. The entire truck rocked on its suspension. A spider web of cracks erupted across the safety glass, but it held. I saw a clawed hand, huge and black, with long yellow talons, scrape down the glass, leaving deep gouges. I jammed the key into the ignition. My hands were shaking so violently I missed the first time. I tried again. The key went in. I twisted it. The engine turned over. Once, twice. The battery was cold. Come on, come on, boom! Another impact, this time on the roof of the cab. It dented the metal with a sound like a thunderclap. I turned the key again. The engine sputtered, caught, and roared to life. I slammed the truck into reverse. I didn't look. I stomped on the gas pedal. The tires spun on the damp leaves, then bit. The truck shot backwards. There was a hideous scraping sound as I backed away from it. I glanced at the side mirror and saw it. It was standing there, its hand still on the door it had just tried to rip open. The yellow eyes burned with fury in the glare of my reverse lights. I swung the wheel, throwing the truck into a sharp turn, and put it in drive. I floored it. The truck fishtailed on the narrow track leading away from the clearing, branches scraping and screeching along its sides. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. I just drove. My foot was welded to the accelerator. I blasted through the logging roads, my headlights cutting a frantic path through the darkness. The truck bounced and slid, the suspension groaning in protest. I hit a pothole so hard my head slammed against the roof. I didn't slow down. I drove for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only 15 minutes, until I hit the paved county road. The feeling of smooth asphalt under my tires was the most reassuring thing I had ever felt. Only then did I dare to slow down. Only then did I allow myself to look in the mirror. There was nothing behind me, just the dark, empty road. I pulled over to the side of the road, the engine still running, the headlights still on, and I started to shake. It wasn't just a tremor, it was a full-body convulsion. My teeth chattered, my limbs trembled uncontrollably. A wave of delayed shock washed over me. So powerful, it felt like I was drowning. I sat there for a long time, in the cab of my truck, in the middle of a deserted road in Maine, shaking. The heater was blasting, but I was freezing cold. I was still in my t-shirt and pajama bottoms. I was still barefoot. My feet were cut and bruised, my ankles throbbing. I looked at the driver's side window. The cracks formed a terrifying starburst, centered on a single point of impact. I reached out a trembling finger and touched it. It was real. This had happened. Eventually, the shaking subsided into a steady, low-level tremor. I put the truck back in drive and started heading south. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away, away from the woods, away from the cabin. I drove for 2 hours until I saw the lights of a small town. I found an all-night gas station and pulled in. The fluorescent lights felt alien, impossibly bright. A man was inside, mopping the floor. He looked up at me as I got out of the truck. I must have been a sight. Wild-eyed, barefoot, dressed in rags, getting out of a truck that looked like it had been through a war zone. He just stared. I walked into the station, the cold of the linoleum floor a shock to my cut feet. I went straight to the payphone on the wall. I didn't have my wallet. It was in my jacket. My jacket was on the floor of the cabin, but I remembered my wife's number. I called her, collect. When she answered, her voice thick with sleep, I couldn't speak. I just started sobbing. Great, heaving, gut-wrenching sobs. I couldn't stop them. It was all the terror, all the adrenaline, all the disbelief pouring out of me at once. She knew something was terribly wrong. She stayed on the line, talking to me, calming me down until I could finally choke out a few words. I'm okay, I said, though it was a lie. I'm coming home. The next day, after I had made it home, after my wife had seen the state of me and the state of my truck, we had to decide what to do. I told her everything. Every detail, the silence, the smell, the head in the window, the eye through the crack in the door, the chase. She listened, she held me, and she believed me. I will be forever grateful for that. She wanted me to go to the police. I refused. What would I say? Hello, officer. I'd like to report an attack by a werewolf. They would have locked me in a padded room. Against my better judgment, I agreed to call the local sheriff's office in the county where the cabin was. I didn't tell them the whole story. I couldn't. I just said that a bear had tried to break into my cabin and that it had done significant damage to my property and my vehicle. I asked if they could send a deputy or a game warden out to take a look. The dispatcher sounded bored. He took my information and said he'd pass it along. A day later, a game warden called me back. His name was something like Bouchard. His tone was dismissive from the start. "So, you had a bear problem?" he asked, a hint of weary amusement in his voice. "Yes," I said. "It tried to break into my cabin. It destroyed the front door and damaged my truck." "All right," he said, drawing the word out. I drove out there, took a look around. There was a pause. I waited. "Well?" I asked. "Well," he said, "I saw your door. It's pretty busted up. And I saw the tracks. Big bear. All right. A male, probably. Got into your trash, I see. Made a real mess." My blood ran cold. I hadn't left any trash out. I was meticulous about that. My grandfather had drilled it into me. All my trash was sealed in a container inside the cabin. "What trash?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You know, the stuff scattered around the front. Coffee grounds, some wrappers. Looks like a plastic bag of some kind. He tore it all up. You got to be more careful with your garbage out here, sir. That's what attracts them." I couldn't speak. It had been inside. After I fled, it had gotten into the cabin. It had gone through my things. It had taken the trash out and scattered it, to make it look like a bear. The intelligence of it, the cunning. It was the most terrifying realization yet. "Sir, you there?" the warden asked, his voice impatient. "The truck?" I managed to say. "Did you see the damage to my truck?" "I saw the cracked window, yeah. He probably got spooked when you started the engine, slapped at the glass. They'll do that sometimes." "And the roof?" I asked. "The dent in the roof?" There was another pause. "Didn't see a dent in the roof," he said, his voice flat. "Look, sir, it was a bear, a big, curious bear. You left food out. It came sniffing around. You got scared. It got scared. End of story. Board up your windows before you leave next time. And for God's sake, secure your trash." He hung up before I could say another word. I never went back to the cabin. I couldn't. A few months later, I hired a lawyer and sold the property, sight unseen, to a timber company for a fraction of what it was worth. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted it gone. I didn't tell the lawyer why I was selling. I didn't tell anyone. For years, I had nightmares. I'd wake up in a cold sweat. The image of those glowing yellow eyes burned into the back of my eyelids. The smell would come back to me at random times, that awful, gagging stench of wet fur and rot. I'd be in a grocery store, a meeting at work, and suddenly I would smell it, and the panic would rise in my chest. I became jumpy, paranoid. I couldn't stand being in the woods, not even a public park. The sound of wind in the trees, a snap of a twig. It all brought me back to that night. I installed floodlights around my house. I checked the locks 3, 4 times before I went to bed. My wife was patient, but it was hard on her. It was hard on our marriage. That's when I went to the therapist. He listened patiently. He diagnosed me with PTSD. He said that I had likely encountered a large, aggressive bear and that in my state of terror, my mind had filled in the blanks with folklore and monster stories. He said the human brain is a powerful thing, capable of creating vivid hallucinations under extreme stress. He called it a confabulation. Maybe he's right. Maybe it was all just a waking nightmare brought on by a bear encounter. Maybe the dead silence, the smell, the two-legged gait, the head in the window, the attempt to pick the lock, the intelligent hatred in its eyes, the act of staging a scene with the trash. Maybe that was all just my terrified mind playing tricks on me. But I don't believe that. I can't. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else. Something that shouldn't exist, but does. Something that lives in the deep, dark woods and watches and waits. I'm telling this story now because I need to. I've carried it alone for too long. I'm not trying to convince anyone. I'm not asking for belief or pity. I just want to put it out there, a warning. My grandfather taught me to respect the woods. He was right, but I don't think even he knew what was truly out there, hidden in the deepest shadows. There are things in this world, ancient and terrible things, that we are not meant to understand. And sometimes they get curious. So, if you ever find yourself alone in the woods, late at night, and the world goes silent around you, don't try to find out why. Get in your car, lock your doors, and drive away. Don't look back, just go, because you are a guest in its home, and you are not welcome. Name withheld. Thank you all for listening tonight, and a very sincere, very genuine thank you to the person who trusted me enough to share that terrifying experience. To carry something like that for a decade. I can't even begin to imagine the weight of it. We appreciate you, and we hope that sharing it has helped in some small way. That's what this is all about, creating a space where these experiences can be shared without ridicule, without judgment. I read the comments you all leave, and I am consistently impressed and humbled by the respectful and thoughtful conversations that happen there. You all have built an incredible community, and I am grateful for it. If you enjoyed your time here tonight, or if these stories resonated with you, please consider taking a moment to like the video and share it with someone you think might appreciate it. And if you haven't already, maybe think about subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you know. Until we meet again, please take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Keep your head on a swivel and watch over your loved ones. I love each and every one of you. As always, stay safe out there, and good night.